Hi, everybody. This is Mary DeFala. Welcome to tonight's educational program entitled Animal Legislation and How to Make a Difference. Tonight's speakers are Janet Fox Stevens, WTCA Legislation and National Breed Club Alliance Committee Chair, and Patty Strand is her guest. She's president of the National Animal Interest Alliance, NAIA. Please mute yourselves so background noise doesn't interfere with their presentation. We have the opportunity to ask questions following their remarks. This program is being recorded and it will be posted so that you can view it again later. The purpose of the program is to provide information on how legislation is initiated and processed into law, why you need to be involved, how to determine who your elected officials are, skills required to be successful in grassroots advocacy, the importance of developing allies, and current legislation on the state and federal level. Now I'll turn things over to Janet. Janet, just let me know when you want slides and I'll do my best from my end.
Okay. Thank you, Mary, and welcome everyone. Good evening. I'm Janet Stevens, as most of you know, and a longtime member of the Welsh Terrier Club, and also a longtime lobbyist at the Colorado Capitol. And when I talk about dog legislation tonight or animal legislation, I'll be talking about generic dog legislation because the Federation of Dog Clubs in Colorado, whom I represent, covers all the AKC affiliated dog clubs in Colorado and all the purebred dogs. So with that in mind, so I want to just say, what is advocacy? It's defined as any action that speaks in favor of, argues for a cause, supports or defends or negotiates on behalf of others. And it's critically important in order to ensure that our rights as dog owners, breeders, and exhibitors are not threatened by unjust laws and regulations that may be coming forward. So you ask, why should you be involved? And it is true that lobbyists and groups such as AKC play a very important part, as well as Patty's group, the National Animal Interest Alliance, in legislation. And but we can't do it all. We need individuals to help us, and legislators really want to hear from you. And later in the program, we're going to show you some links how you can access who your legislators are if you don't know, and your local elected officials as well. And don't know much, the elected officials don't know much about purebred dogs, about breeding dogs, about responsible dog ownership. And remember, you are the expert in this. You are the one that knows the fancy, the sport, you know your dogs, and you know the importance of maintaining purpose-bred breeds. And so your legislators have to hear from their constituents, and you are one of them. And they do take in mind what you're saying so that they can put forth reasonable laws in their communities and representing their constituencies while they do it. So as far as your individual legislator, you will be a very important part and person for them. Okay, Mary, next slide. Okay, so Will Rogers had it right. He said, and he didn't talk about legislation, but remember, regarding all legislative and elected issues, if you're on the right track, you'll get run over if you just sit there. In other words, please be active and get involved in advocacy. Okay, so now we're going to just run through quickly how a bill becomes a law so you have a basis for what we're going to talk about tonight. So the slides we're going to show you now are a bit glib, but they do represent what happens to a bill as it moves through the process. So first, how does a bill get initiated? And that is it can come from an individual citizen who sees a need for change in the law, either increased regulation or decreased regulation. It can come from a special interest group. Mostly it comes from the legislator's constituency, but HSUS and other animal rights groups come into all the states. They are there right now. They're heavily funded, and they come in to initiate legislation in our state and in your state as well. And so they will get a legislator friendly to them to introduce a bill. And it's usually, once a legislator has decided to do it, it goes into drafting. And most of these groups will not tell us, even though they know our presence, they know who we are, how to get a hold of us, about a bill that's coming that we're not going to like, because they want to surprise us with it. So in all states except one, there are bicameral legislators and legislatures. And what that means is there's a House of Representatives and a Senate. And that is also true in Congress. There is a House of Representatives and a Senate. And so wherever a bill starts, it may start in one house or the other. The Senate is generally regarded as the upper house and the House of Representatives as the lower house. So a bill can start in any one of those two chambers. And after it's read across the desk and introduced, it goes to the first committee. And all bills are required to have a hearing. And so they must do something with the bill in committee. And this is where one of your chances are to come in and talk to legislators and to testify. And lots of citizens come in that have never done it before. And now in today's day and age with COVID, a lot of times you can come in remotely from your home. And if you sign up ahead of time, and if you call your Capitol, they will walk you through that process. So the bill can be amended in committee, it can be killed, it can be passed. If it's passed, it goes to second reading. And that is where the major debate on a bill occurs. And a very informal vote is taken on the bill, but it is necessary to have a majority to pass it into third reading. After it passes third reading, that is a recorded vote where you can see how your legislators voted. So after all that, we're not done, because if the bill passes third reading, it now goes to the second house. If it starts in the Senate, it goes to the House of Representatives, and it starts the process all over again. So never give up. It's never too late to make a change in a bill as it moves through the process. Those that need funding are sometimes given to the Budget Committee, or most times they are. And depending on a dog bill, how much funding it needs is whether it will get out of that committee. It depends on the other priorities in a state budget, whether these small bills, it may call for another inspector in the Department of Agriculture or something like that. And so it needs to be funded. So generally they chop them off at the pass, and they have a lot of priorities. So then as the bill is passes the second house, if it does, and then again you have a lot of time for input. This is how it looks when it's enacted into law. It generally doesn't look like it did when it started, and there have been a lot of changes and negotiations and compromises on the bill. And then it gets to the state agency, which in our case would most likely be the Department of Agriculture. And how they implement their rules is another process that we do get involved in to make sure that they are following what the bill intended as they see it. So that is the bill moving through the process. And then some more ideas on why you need to be involved and why we need to have our voices heard. If you go to the Capitol, you will be representing not only yourself, but all purebred dog owners in your talk with legislators. And we have to make our voices heard, because currently, and for a long time now, you and your dog are the target of the animal rights activists. So we have to be involved. And in Colorado, our federation works really hard to make sure that we're either exempted from the bills or have an amendment to the bill that is needed. This year, we had a bill on exotic animals and tigers, elephants, all kinds of exotic animals. And at first I thought, why do we even care about exotic animals? You know, it's not dogs. We don't need to get involved. But after looking at the bill, it was clear that some of the language in the bill may have prohibited hunting trials and various dog activities in our state. And in addition, because there were prohibitions on any exotic animal coming into the state for other than educational purposes, there was no training allowed. They had to only be allowed in if they were going to be seen as they are in their natural state. So there would be no training of monkeys or elephants to ride or anything like that. So on looking at those prohibitions, we decided that we needed a clear exemption for dog shows and dogs coming into the state. So we sought a canine exemption and also the exemption for sporting events. And the bill sponsors agreed to do that for us. We did change some of the language, and they did announce on the microphone that in no way was this bill to impact our sport of dog shows. And so these are the things that, you know, 5 years ago, I wouldn't have probably paid attention to this bill. But the other thing is the animal rights activists say, okay, we want exotic animals to behave in their natural habitat, behave naturally. And I guess if you're a member of NAIA, you get Patty's weekly updates. And today there was one that shocked me, but it didn't surprise me, because in it, she found from PETA that the quote, depriving our dogs the opportunity to engage in their natural behavior is cruel. And so that means no training, no shows, no crating, no fun, that you just let your dog act naturally. And so it has come down from the exotic animals and how they are now only allowed to be in their natural habitat and to act naturally, all the way down to our dogs. And Patty can probably comment further on that. So next, we're going to talk about talking with your legislator. So we can move on to that. They can see the slides. Try to get together with your legislator when they're not busy during the legislative session. Take them out to coffee, invite them to some kind of a function so that you can get to know them a little bit. Can we go on to the next one, Mary? And always be respectful of your elected officials. They may not agree with you at all, and you may not be able to change their mind if they are an animal rights activist themselves, or they have some other kind of agenda behind their bill. And if they're willing to speak with you and they disagree, disagree with them diplomatically, it's easy to take it personally, but remember, we're talking about the issues. We're not talking about individual people when we're talking to our elected officials. And so if they will not change their ideas and change the bill, then you need to move on to the next one. Thank them for their time, because in Colorado, out of 65 representatives, we need 33 votes to get an amendment or to get a bill killed or passed in that particular house. So we don't need everybody. And if they're locked into their position, there's nothing that probably can be done except an argument. It's been said that legislators say, or it's been said about legislators that they don't let the facts get in the way. And this can be very true, that they're on a mission, they have their idea, and they're going to move forward no matter what the facts say. So be aware of that and try to move along. And then we can go to the next slide. And when you are communicating with your legislator, you can write a letter, you can call them, or you can meet with them in person. And so when you write a letter, I think this slide will be available to you, how you do address them, the honorable, and then their name, and then say, "Dear Senator Smith," or whatever their name has to be. And again, be respectful, be professional in your communication with them. And if you are, they will respect you as well, and they're more liable to listen to what you have to say than if you argue with them, which has been done, but they don't really respond to that in a positive way. So writing a letter, and then the next slide tells you about calling. And if you're talking to their staff, that's fine, because a lot of times legislators take their ideas from their staff, and they will pass along your message. So it's easy to call, leave a message if you can't reach them, and follow up with a letter as well if there is time. Then the next slide is the meeting. And you should know something about the legislative process, where the bill is in the process. And please make it very clear, if you're talking to an elected official, what your position is. I've heard people get up and testify for 5 or 10 minutes on an issue, and when they get done, you have no idea what their position actually was. So you have to say, "I'm here to support House Bill 1102, or I'm here to oppose Senate Bill 10, whatever." Get that in up front after you introduce yourself, and then make your comments after that. And that way they'll know exactly where you are. And also when you meet with them, they might say, "Well, you know, I really like what you said, and I think you have really good points." And then you'll come back and say, "Hey, they're going to vote our way because they said they really liked what I said." But unless you get a true commitment from them and say, "Will you vote no on this bill?" then they say, "Well, I'm not sure," or "No, I can't. I'm sorry. I made a commitment," or "Yes, I will vote with you this time." So that is very important to know, and that they understood your message and that they are going to move along with you. Okay. These are some websites which we won't keep on the screen right now. There are 2 of them there, but the AKC has excellent resources. They let you know what's going on across the country. They have a legislative toolbox with all kinds of good material in it, and they track bills as they move, and they have position statements on almost all the issues that you might want. So if you need some talking points with your legislator, go to the position statements from AKC and see what they say. Okay, I think at this point, I would really like to turn this over to Patty, and let's hear from her. I can't wait to hear what she has to say. She's so knowledgeable, and I appreciate her joining us so much today.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. I've worked with Janet in the state of Colorado, gosh, what would you say, 10 years now, 8 years, something like that. It's been a long time. And Janet is a true professional. I have to admit right up front that I'm not. I'm sort of a by the seat of the pants, grassroots, mad as hell, not going to take it anymore kind of participant in all this. I do have a degree in political science, but I never expected, I got the degree. I actually wanted to be a diplomat of all things when I was in college. Never expected to be working on legislation the way that I have now for the last 30 years. We founded NAIA in 1991, and we founded it because we had insane legislation being introduced in our state, Oregon, and before that, California, the famous San Mateo breeding ban got all of our attention. And once I got involved with the state legislature, I met people from agriculture, I met people from research, I met people from different industry groups and, the sheep growers and the cattlemen and on and on and on, hunting groups, and realized what they told me was, oh my gosh, they're finally after you. We knew about the animal rights agenda, and we knew that it was focused on hunting and some of these issues that can be easily disparaged with the general public. The idea of shooting an animal, of course, is a pretty horrific idea for, a lot of people living in urban areas and so on. But they said, on the animal rights agenda, pets have always been there, but we never thought that they'd really get around to it. So anyway, that was my introduction to it. I was sort of gobsmacked. I was not really aware of what was going on any more than anybody else at the time. But in working on the issue, starting in the actually in the late 80s, but formally working on the issues in the early 90s, I kind of rapidly, I guess, got mad enough to become very, very involved. My husband and I wrote the first book on the subject of animal rights extremism in the United States. That was in 1992, and it was called The Hijacking of the Humane Movement, Animal Extremism. There were a whole bunch of things that kind of sent me over the edge and got me involved. Again, if you knew me in 1985, you would never have expected that I would have gotten involved with anything like this. It was the last thing on my list. I was going to dog shows and really having fun, belonging to my kennel club, etc. So one of the things that got me involved was through my kennel club. I had been on an advisory board for Multnomah County Animal Control. So I was very aware of what their practices were, what their challenges were, and also what the pet population of my city, Portland, Oregon, was, and how it had improved so dramatically over the last actually, they was one of the kind of leg up opportunities that I had, or pieces of information I had that a lot of other people didn't have back then, was I live in a city that had kept really good data records on pet populations. So you could look at what they have, and you could see that even though we still had adoptable dogs being put to sleep there, that in fact, in 1973, we were euthanizing 18,000 dogs in Portland, Oregon, between the two main shelters. That was the Humane Society and the Animal Control Agency. And I would just tell you that last year, between both of those agencies, we put to sleep about 300 to 400 dogs, and none of them were adoptable. Every single one was sick, old, or dangerous. But anyway, even in 1991, you could see the trajectory. You could see that even though things were not great, that things were getting better. So when I would read things about the dog community, or we would be made the focus of an overpopulation bill, we had to end breeding because dog breeders were filling up the shelters and everything. I had a frame of reference that told me that wasn't true. And then in working in the legislative process, I did meet people who were certainly by the standards that I was familiar with, very, very extreme, and that were clearly operating outside of any kind of democratic or representative process. So anyway, that's what really got me engaged. And I have to apologize. I could have sent a PowerPoint, and I think that Janet maybe even kind of nudged me that I could, but maybe I missed the cue. So I can send you a PowerPoint that you can distribute a little bit later. But for now, I will just say that the reason that you should get involved, and I'll just distill it really quickly, is because we're losing. Legislatively, coast to coast, in the 30 years I've been involved, all we've done is really lose ground. And for the animal rights people, the issues that they bring up are all, people love animals. This movement, the extremist movement, wouldn't work if it wasn't for the fact that all of us already love animals. And most people who are not mentally ill, want to treat their animals right. They keep animals because they care about them. And of course, there are extremes. There are people who mistreat animals, and all of us are against that. But they're very, very good at showing pictures and presenting narratives, stories that would make the general public and even people in our community believe that mistreatment of animals is so very common that we must pass really draconian legislation in order to stop it. Now, one of the things that you find when you've been at it as long as me is that many of the narratives, many of the claims that they make, many of the things that they say they desire are not things they practice themselves. So you're dealing with people who are promoting ideas that they don't follow themselves. And I would just say that one of the things, the thing that distracts all of us, not just the general public, but us, is the fact that we do love animals and we get all involved in the narratives that they weave. And we forget, or maybe don't notice, that what's really happening is that they are really moving into a position of being in charge of the issues legislatively, just being in charge of the whole swath of issues that have to do with animals. So a minute ago, Janet said that you needed to get involved, and she gave you some really good ways of getting involved. But I would say that the first thing that you should do is simply, no matter whether you've been involved in the past or not, you should, number one, find out who all of your representatives are, your local, your state, and your federal representatives. Take down their phone numbers and make a phone call. I work with people who've worked in some of these areas for 20 years or more that don't know who their representatives are. And I would say, without being offensive, that I would doubt that many of you, just because I've spoken to a lot of groups, many of you don't know who your representatives are. When we talk about writing a letter, doing this or that, it's very difficult for any of us, for our constituencies to do this, because they don't necessarily have an issue right at the moment that they feel that they can call about, and it's an uncomfortable kind of thing for them to do. So I would say, find the phone number. First of all, find the names of every representative you have. This is at your local level, if you have a county commission or a mayor situation, who your state representatives are, who your federal ones are, and get phone numbers for them and simply call up. And you won't probably get the legislator, you probably won't get the person who was elected to office, but you can get a hold of their aide and you can just introduce yourself and you can say, I am, Mary Gruber, and I am your constituent, and I love dogs, and I'm very concerned that from time to time legislation or ordinances are introduced that I'm an expert about, but somehow or another I'm not involved with the process. I would like to set up an appointment where I can come in and tell you a little bit about the community I belong to, the purebred dog community, the kennel clubs that are both local, state, national, how we contribute to the economic impact of the area, and just a little bit about our community. We promote responsible. Anyway, just get the conversation going. Introduce yourself. It is really, we imagine that it's a lot more difficult than it turns out to be. You just need to make the phone call. Find out who they are and make the phone call. The rest of it will unfold for you, and you can go in and you'll probably be nervous, but you do represent a community that is trying to do it right. That's one of the other things that really got my attention when working on this, was we were being asked to do things that were ridiculous, while the things that we were doing as purebred dog enthusiasts that have clubs to work with and work with the Canine Health Foundation and AKC and so on, we actually are the leaders in all of this. We are the ones who know how to do it right, and yet our voice is not usually the one that's heard first. We wind up usually having to go in defensively because we don't have that relationship already. So going back to what really got me started in this, which was recognizing that a lot of the information that was driving negative legislation was false. Again, my knowledge about pet population dynamics in the United States. Just a second, I'm going to yell at my dog. Do you hear my dog barking in the background? I'm going to mute you for a second. Okay, and now I'm back. Sorry about that. But I do still have dogs. We've been breeding dogs for 52 years, and I don't know what I would do if I no longer had dogs. So anyway, because of this longtime interest in pet populations and my knowledge about it, we began tracking dog legislation all over the country. The first bills that were introduced in the early 90s, almost all of them were based on the concept of out of control dog overpopulation, or more generally, they'd say pet overpopulation. And of course, because feral cats would get tossed into the numbers when you make it pet population rather than dogs, it always looked enormous and out of control. But anyway, we started tracking this, and toward the end of the 90s, we began to notice that, gosh, a lot of these states that we worked in, my state in particular, but certainly the Northeast and around the Great Lakes, and a lot of most of the states in the North, were moving into an area that you would call equilibrium as far as supply and demand on dogs. And that's the ideal state, that you'd get to a position where no adoptable dog is being euthanized. I think that the activists would call that no-kill status, when less than 10% of your dogs are euthanized. They would say that that means that you're in a no-kill status. No adoptable dogs are being put to sleep. Well, we were moving into that area in many, many, many parts of the country by the end of the 90s. And then by the beginning of 2000, by the beginning of this century, we were noticing that areas that no longer had a supply of dogs of their own were beginning to import dogs from all over the country. And we have some veterinarians on our board, and we began to notice that some of the dogs that were coming into our areas were not just from distant states and distant territories, but also from foreign countries. And some of those foreign countries had pathogens, they had diseases that we either never had in the United States or that were eradicated. So we began working on this issue of trying to get a handle on, in some way or another, responsibly regulating the mass movement of dogs all over the United States because of the disease risk. Anyway, long story short, and Janet's looking up like maybe I'm talking too long, I don't know. But anyway, long story short.
Not at all.
we worked with USDA, we worked with CDC, we worked with Border Protection. And after a number of years of really not getting anywhere, we finally realized that the reason that we weren't getting anywhere is that there was no statutory authority anywhere at the federal level for these agencies to really do anything. Before you can write regulations, before you can create a regulatory framework, you have to have a law on the books that you can attach the regulations to. And because nobody in the early 90s could have imagined a scenario in which the United States would begin importing thousands, hundreds of thousands, and eventually over 1 million dogs a year into the United States. We just simply didn't have laws that govern that or dictate to agencies what they should do. So we began working with a group called the Russell Group in Washington, DC back in 2016. They're an extremely well-respected lobby firm. They have like ex-secretaries of agriculture in their office. Everybody in their office is a very experienced professional. And by 2017, we were working with them formally to pass a bill that would begin to regulate the import of dogs from overseas, so that at least they would be required to have a health certificate. You know, when you send a dog state to state in the United States, you have to do that. Unbelievably, dogs were coming into the United States continuously without proper health certificates, without proper rabies certificates, and so on. So we began to work on that. And first of all, because we hadn't really worked with federal lawmakers on this issue individually. There were a few lawmakers we worked with, but we didn't blanket the whole Congress with information about it. So it was a new issue to most of the legislators there. And one of the problems we had was that they didn't believe that our claims were true. We had been maintaining numbers of our best estimates of the number of dogs coming in, but that's different than having a government report. So the first thing we did was to add language to the 2018 Farm Bill requiring that a federal report be issued on the number of dogs coming into the country every year. And lo and behold, we found that in 2018, over 1 million dogs had been imported. And it also looked like it had been, well, it didn't look like, it had been increasing every single year since 2000. In fact, the number of dogs that they estimated coming in represent 1/8 of the entire dog marketplace. So this is really a significant number to keep in mind, especially if you are a hobby breeder and your rights are being challenged to breed dogs in the United States. The idea that 1 million dogs that used to be produced in the United States are now being produced in developing countries primarily for the marketplace in the United States. This is, this is wrong on a number of levels. Clearly, the United States has the best standards. I think probably some of the Scandinavian countries and a couple of the Western European countries operate at about the same level we do. But surely dogs that are coming in from South Korea and from China and from Colombia and Bolivia and all the different countries they're coming from, they're certainly not raised with the well-being of the dogs in mind like they are here. And then even more important from my standpoint as a longtime dog breeder, we found that dogs were coming in routinely with diseases that could be passed on to our dogs, in particular canine brucellosis. Canine brucellosis is more prevalent in street dogs than it is in obviously dogs that are raised in households with people who take care of them. And we were getting inundated with dogs with canine brucellosis. We were getting a smattering of dogs with rabies. Rabies, of course, by the time you get symptoms, it's lethal. So this is a very, very serious disease. And there are a ton of tropical diseases which can be passed not only to people, but also to our animals that you just don't want to get set up in the United States. So again, long story short, we introduced, and we have partners in this, the American Kennel Club and the AVMA have joined us in this. So we have a working partnership with them, which was very, very helpful. But we have HR 4239, which is the House bill. It's called the Healthy Dog Importation Act. And then on the Senate side, we have Senate Bill 2597. And I sure appreciate it if you'd write that down, because I'm going to ask you to write your US representative and your senators when this is over. All you have to do is write 2 sentences. Just say, I live in such and such and such and such place. I'm your constituent. I would so appreciate it if you would support these bills, maybe even come on as a co-sponsor, because we're looking for co-sponsors right now. Very, very simple.
Can you give those numbers again, please?
Yes, it's it's HR, which stands for the House of Representatives, Bill 4239. And in the Senate, it's called Senate Bill 2597. In the House, the president of the Veterinary Caucus, Dusty Johnson, and the only veterinarian in the House of Representatives, Kurt Schrader, are the 2 lead sponsors. And in the Senate, we have Chuck Grassley and we have Tina Smith, from Chuck Grassley from Iowa, Tina Smith from Minnesota. These are respected names throughout the Congress, especially on issues that have to do with veterinary medicine, public health, that sort of thing. We feel good about these bills. We feel like we're going to get them to pass. It's very, very difficult, as Janet pointed out, from beginning to end. There's so many different things that can present themselves as obstacles, but we do think that this bill will pass. Now, there's some concern on the part of people who import dogs for their own kennels that this will in some way harm you. It will not. This bill is focused 100% on health. It's not on animal welfare or anything else. It's just the health of the dogs. We did that very, very carefully, because if you get it so that you're talking about the welfare of dogs, pretty soon a dog standing in the streets of Egypt is going to be taken. We're going to bring it in regardless. And you have to have health standards. And so what we did was we moved the oversight for these issues from under the Animal Welfare Act. We moved it to the Animal Health Protection Act, which is the one that governs all the other animals that come into the United States, or at least all the livestock, I should say. And it's and to veterinary services rather than animal care. There's several different little wings of APHIS, of USDA APHIS. There's animal care and vet services. We moved it to vet services. We want the entire thrust to be on animal health. So unless you want dogs to come in that are not properly vetted, this will not harm you in any way. If you're bringing in dogs from any place in Europe, they already have standards that are very similar, the DHLP type shots and the rabies, and you have veterinarians that the United States can recognize as legitimate, and they'll be able to get a health certificate and come in. Now, CDC recently banned the importation of dogs from 113 countries. That does affect some dog breeders that were getting dogs from the Ukraine and from Russia. But keep in mind, they had to ban them because they have no regulatory framework. And they have no regulatory framework because there is no federal bill yet. In other words, if you want to import dogs from countries that have, let me back up. The reason that they banned the import, or suspended, I should say, the import of dogs from these 113 countries is that these countries are all at high risk for rabies. And the CDC is in charge of public health, protecting public health from foreign and domestic threats. And they continually were getting this trickle of rabid dogs coming in from countries that had, high risk for rabies. But the thing that made them feel they had to do this was that the papers that they were getting were fraudulent. And our bill requires that the veterinarian issue the papers, be an approved veterinarian. They do this with livestock. So it's something that veterinary services has experience doing. And it has a process so that you're never going to get rid of fraud, because people who commit fraud, people who lie, cheat, and steal are still going to figure out a way. Some of them are going to figure out a way to do it, but it's going to greatly reduce the amount of fraud that we're seeing in the paperwork. So basically CDC threw up their hands and they said, we don't have a framework to do this any other way. We have to simply suspend importation. And by the way, when they get the last rabid dog that came in was in a shipment of 34 dogs. All of the other 33, all the dogs, including the one that was rabid, had already been distributed to rescue homes. And every time this happens, CDC spends between $250,000 and $500,000 to follow up with everybody, to make sure people get post-exposure treatment if they need that, and to evaluate the dogs that are distributed. So it's a public health risk, and it's also very costly. Okay, so in June and then again at the beginning of August, we were able to get the bill introduced in the House and the Senate side. That's where those bill numbers come from, is the bill numbers that were assigned at the time it was introduced. The other thing we did this year was we got $1 million appropriated for vet services, so that they'll be able to convert their system so that they can deal with this. There'll also be a permit fee for people bringing dogs into the United States. I think it'll probably be about $150. And that's really not terrible when you think about it. And also when you think about the fact that you do want your own dogs protected from the diseases that might be coming in. So anyway, that's what we've been working on. We're very excited about it. We think it's very, very important, again, not only for our dogs' health, but because we think that it's sort of ridiculous that the dog marketplace in the United States is now, an eighth of it is now made up of dogs coming from developing countries. We think that American bred dogs are the ones that should be in American homes primarily. Now, if people breed healthy dogs abroad and they want to send them here and you want to work with them, that's great as far as we're concerned. But that's not the marketplace. That's dealing breeder to breeder. These dogs are being bred for the American marketplace abroad. I don't know what, go ahead.
When you get finished, Patty, I want to quickly go over some other legislative issues that are out there. So.
Okay, that's very good. I can stop now, and if people have questions, they can ask them. But I did want to tell you that we also have a website. It's called, we have two groups actually. We have NAIA, which is National Animal Interest Alliance, and that's the educational organization. That's the organization that's put together all of the data about shelter populations and a number of other subjects that we cover. We also have a legislative group called NAIA Trust, and its website is simply naiatrust.org. And I would ask you to go there, and the very first link, the upper right, says subscribe to our mailing list. And if you do that, you'll get our little weekly newsletter, and you'll also get all the alerts on this federal bill. And I'd really appreciate it if you'd do that. So that's it for me.
Patty, thank you so much.
Thank
You
you.
mentioned that you have some PowerPoints, and if you
I
can
do.
send those to Janet or to me, we'll make sure that they go along with this recorded program so that people can see everything that you suggested. All those links and that sort of thing, I presume, are in your slides, so they'll have them and not worry about having written something down incorrectly.
Yes, thank you for that. I appreciate that.
So, Janet, you had some issues you wanted to bring up?
Yeah, just a couple. I'll go real quick so you guys can ask questions, but another bill that recently is on the federal, or actually it's an action by the USDA, concerns over African swine fever prompts order restricting imports of dogs for resale. And this also is banning dogs from certain countries that have the African swine fever, because the dogs are able to bring that in, and it would decimate our pork industry and other industries if this gets rampant in the United States right now. So the USDA and APHIS is working on those issues. And then we have, I lost my paper here.
And let me just jump in a second. The pork producers are part of our bill, by the way. And so the swine fever, the issue of swine fever, that was one of the reasons why they signed on to our bill. And when I send you the PowerPoint, I'll show you the list of all of the other groups that are involved. It's pretty impressive. It's a serious issue. Excuse me.
And so along the lines of why we care about other groups and building our coalitions, there's always safety in numbers at the Capitol. And if you have like-minded groups that you would not ordinarily partner up with, you can partner up with them for legislation. And because of the money behind the animal rights activists, we have to get together with groups that we would not necessarily, and we're not endorsing the group, but we are working with them on legislation. And that would be the commercial breeders and the pet stores. And I wanted to read you this from the AKC blog. Most breeders don't think of themselves as having much in common with retail pet stores, but many anti-breeder extremists already consider that you are one. And a slew of legislation now appearing in dozens of communities across the country defines just about anyone who breeds or sells dog as a retail pet store. And recently there's been legislation introduced that would, if you transfer or sell one dog a year, you would be considered a retail pet store. So we have to watch these things closely to make sure that we are not involved in this legislation, and it does not mean that they can come into our homes to regulate us and our breeding programs. So just real quick, across the United States right now, AKC has a list of the most common bills, and COVID-19 and release of liability. There are over 500 bills, and that would impact our dog shows, which did get some exemptions from release of liability. There are a lot of cruelty laws out there, livestock, pet adoption, safety, and protection from animal abusers, and tethering is all under the cruelty. Tethering is a common issue going across the country right now. And someone got a ticket for tethering their dog outside the grocery store for 10 minutes, had the dog in full sight while they were in there. And because they have a no tether law in that community, that state, they were cited and given a ticket for that. So some of these laws can go a little bit too far. Animal control is a common issue. Again, pet stores, rescues and shelters. States are beginning to see that rescues and shelters need oversight. They may need to quarantine their dogs when they come into the state. Right now, there's little oversight. So buying a dog from, as Patty said, a breeder, a hobby breeder, a commercial breeder, at least there is some regulation in our country right now for those breeders. Not our hobby breeders so much, but we're under different ethics because of our national clubs. But at any rate, so there's beginning to see that maybe quarantine is not a bad idea, and that maybe these dogs need chips so that when they leave the shelters, they can be tracked in the event that they have come in with some kind of disease. Performance events are up there, and this can impact anything from a circus down to our field trials and our dog shows. Breeder regulation and restrictions is rampant everywhere. And this is something that we're watching very, very closely. Dangerous dogs and breed-specific legislation. I'm happy to say that many states and municipalities are now loosening up on that, that they're getting our message that it is the deed and not the breed that you should be concerned with if there is a dangerous dog. And so a lot of municipalities are changing their dogs along those lines. So ownership limits is another thing, how many dogs you can have, and depending on your acreage, et cetera, or if you're in town, there are many municipal ordinances on that. So that's all I have to say, and I'm happy that Patty was here to join us with all the good information she had. And so we'd be happy to answer any questions if that's fine with you, Mary.
Absolutely. I have one. Maybe I can kick it off. How are the advocacy groups funded? Where do the advocacy groups get their funding?
Okay, Patty, why don't you go with that?
Okay, well, it varies, of course. They typically have advertisements, campaigns that show animals in sad situations. I think we've all seen the ASPCA Sarah McLaughlin ad. There was an article not too long ago in the New York Times about the bazillions of dollars they've raised, and somebody on the board of directors there was complaining that they don't do any real work now that they've learned how to raise money by just telling sad stories on TV. But the general public, I mean, this is a nation of animal lovers. And again, this movement would have no traction at all if it wasn't for the fact that we do care. We care deeply. And when we see an animal in trouble, we open up our hearts and our wallets and we send money. And there's also other groups that fund. There are billionaires and millionaires. One of the things you have to remember, and I don't want to take this off course or put too fine a point on it, but you do have to remember that the animal rights movement was founded by an avowed Marxist. And so the whole idea of redistribution is important to some of the funders of this movement. This movement wasn't just a bunch of people who loved dogs who ran shelters and decided that they would take it to the next level. It was introduced by Peter Singer and some other folks that were at Oxford at the time. They had an ideology, not just and if you read the early works of the animal rights movement, it's very, very clear that they understand that by using this movement a certain way that they can affect agriculture, research, pet ownership, everything. People are connected to animals throughout everything they do in their lives every day. So there are some sinister players in this too, but I think for the most part, you have, true believers, people who are ideologues who have a lot of money, and then just individuals who have a big heart for animals.
Can you also talk about your own organization, and I'll talk about the Federation of Dog Clubs and the AKC and how we get our money to do our advocacy?
Yeah, our group is a coalition. We do work with just about everybody who works with dogs. Works with animals, I should say. One of our programs is a program called Homes for Animal Heroes. We do rehoming of animals who've been in research. They're almost entirely beagles. We've placed about 500 so far, and it goes up kind of exponentially. I would guess next year we'll be at 700 or 800. There is a real need for this. It's interesting on the research side. It's pretty much like the hobby dog breeder side. We started doing something, maybe we didn't call it rescue back in the 80s. It was more informal. We didn't have parent clubs funding it necessarily till about the end of the 80s. And anyway, the research community is the same. They have been placing dogs with people within their family, within their community, anybody that they knew well enough to place the dogs with, but they only recently started a formal rehoming program that can go to the general public. So we work on that. And one thing that you said, Janet, that I wanted to add to when you're talking about pet stores, one of the things hobby breeders don't realize is that under the Animal Welfare Act, we are pet stores. We are pet stores under the Animal Welfare Act. And every year or every time the Animal Welfare Act is updated, we are exempted from being treated the way that other pet stores are treated. This particular issue was actually litigated. The Doris Day Animal League took USDA to court to make us be recognized as pet stores and have to follow the same rules that pet stores do. So there's a whole bunch of reasons for us to be as engaged as we possibly can be with all the other people who work with animals responsibly. For us as a coalition, we simply demand that people are doing things legally and are working for improvements. And if they are in that ballpark, we will work with them. We do extensive lobbying around the country and at the federal level. And we don't take on issues where we can't be sure that the people are actually operating in a way that would be, that we consider to be ethical and so on. But that leaves, that we're working with a lot of different groups. So like the pork producers, the cattlemen, sheep growers. I used to represent the sheep growers that are headquartered there in Colorado at the federal level. I was on an advisory board at the federal level with USDA about 10 years ago. So yeah, we work with everybody, and it is a tremendous advantage. I'm going to say one more thing. When we first started, I founded Responsible Dog Breeders of Oregon, and I found that dog breeders, like most people, have other things in their life besides legislation. And I could rouse them and get them involved and come to the legislature when the wolf was at the door, when there was literally a bill that was attacking them right at that moment that they were afraid of. I could rally them and get them to show up and take action. But, fortunately, we don't have those draconian bills every year. And unfortunately for my group, gosh, in between legislative sessions or in between ones that had really bad legislation, the dog people would drift away. And so that's really how NAI was formed. We realized that because the animal rights movement attacks everybody who's involved with animals, regardless of whether or not they're trying to do it right. I mean, animal rights versus animal welfare is opposed to any use of animals, no matter how humane or responsible. I mean, that is really the fundamental definition. And of course, only the people at the top, the ideologues, say that. Everybody else has pets in the movement and so on. But that's what you have to keep in mind. And that's what's used legally to justify the defamation and so on that they routinely use against all of their targets. Anyway, I'm getting off script now, so I'll go back to you. Excuse me.
Okay, Mary, did you want to know how we were funded?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so
AKC help to fund these groups. Do kennel clubs help to fund the groups? Where does NIAI get the money to do all the things they do?
right,
Yeah.
and yes, and most of us are nonprofits, and in Colorado, the Colorado Federation of Dog Clubs, the individual all breed clubs and also single breed clubs contribute to our effort every year. And because of that, they were able to hire a lobbyist, which is me. And also they were able to bring in outside speakers. We brought Patty in one time when it was really necessary for the legislators to hear her message. And she came and it was very successful. And we use the money for written materials and fact sheets and things like that, and travel, things that we need to do. And AKC has a political action committee, a PAC, And you can go to their website and contribute directly to the PAC. And they also have a legislative fund that they are asking for donations. So, and I think through Patty's group, either the trust or the NAIA itself, the trust is the legislative form. So if you're going to get on her list, I would hope that you would consider or have your groups consider joining and providing a donation, because we have to fight this good fight. And we can't do it without funds, especially on the national level. AKC does a stellar job, as does NAIA, in getting the message out to all of those legislators. And they come into our state. If we have a need on bills dropped in committee the next day, and we are at 5 o'clock that night, we can contact AKC and they will help us. By the next day, they have a fact sheet ready for us to go to our legislators. And with their name behind what we're doing at our own state capitol, it makes a big difference. So these are the things that they need resources, and the NAIA and our local groups, your local federation in your own state, take a look at it, see where it is, what it is, and there is a link to federations on the AKC website, and those folks are acting on your behalf in your own individual state. And our club, the Welsh Terrier Club of America, I'm chair of the legislative committee. We don't have a formal legislative liaison, but we do try to get through the committee the word out to our club members and keep them informed in what's going on.
Great, thank you for that. We're really out of time, but if anybody has any burning issues, I don't want to cut it off too soon because you haven't had a chance really to engage in any discussion. So are there any issues you'd like to have our two guests address for you?
Just one quick thing, in keeping with what you were just talking about, Janet, you said that the AKC has some type of advocacy group in each state. Did I hear that correctly? So is it that they're like, is it a group that's specific to the AKC? Is it connected to a state kennel club? Like, how does that work? I think you called it a federation.
Yeah, Mary Ellen, it's basically the reverse. We are formed of AKC clubs and people that belong to AKC. So we are actually representing the individual kennel clubs in our state, like Colorado Kennel Club, but they are all affiliated with the American Kennel Club. So the AKC does not set this up. We set it up in our own individual states, but as members, we are members of AKC through our dogs and our registrations and our kennel clubs. But
so
AKC,
each state has something, is what you're saying?
Not every state does, no.
Okay.
But
AKC, no, not every state.
AKC does have a list on their website of who the federations are.
Okay, thank you.
I have just a really quick question. Earlier you said it was important to send an introductory letter. Could that be by email as well, or would a paper letter be more,
Yes, absolutely. By email as well. How about you, Patty? You agree with that?
Yeah, I'm really big on the telephone, to be honest. But just because I know how busy everybody is, and I know that it is difficult for some people to sit down and figure out just how to start it, all of that. And you can just pick up the phone and make a phone call, introduce yourself. You don't have to be, a college professor, and talk about legislation at that level. You just have to let them know you're a constituent and you care about these issues and you'd like to talk to them.
But in lieu of the written letter anymore, I think email is an option. As long as you state clearly the bill number and your position and where you live.
Other questions or comments?
I just think it's important to be a member of your local kennel club. And this is where you can get involved both with your time and your financial support. We have Tennessee Dog Federation and our kennel club. We always vote how much to contribute financially to it because it does take money to keep these things moving and going and interest. And I just encourage everyone to please join your local kennel club. I mean, it may be local an hour or two. We have members that come 2 and 3 hours, but it is important to participate in your local clubs, I think.
I do too. Very important.
Other quick comments? Well, I guess we'll close then. Thank you very much to Janet and Patty for your contribution tonight. We learned a lot, and I will post the replay of this, the video of this, on Facebook at the Welsh Terrier Education Network and on the Mid-States Welsh Terrier Club page. And we will also get it up on the Welsh Terrier Club of America website. That will take a few days, so be patient. That will give Patty a few days to give us her visuals also that have more detail for us so that we can refer back to that. And I presume, Patty, you are available if we need to reach out to you, as is Janet. Janet, you can't hide from us, but Patty, are you available if anybody has questions or would like?
Always.
Great.
Always, yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. With that, well, Keith, did you have something you wanted to add? Oh, okay.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you for all your work on this too.
You're very
Appreciate it.
welcome. We're very welcome. Thank you again for your excellent presentations, and thank you again to everybody who participated tonight. We appreciate it. Take good
Thank you.
care, and we'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.